This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning everyone. Shalom Aleichem. We're beginning a topic which is an unprecedented subject. You know, when we speak about certain contemporary issues, so for example, if you want to speak about organ donation and you want to know, is it permitted, is it required, is it allowed, is it obligatory, is it permissible to donate an organ, we have precedent for that. We have a Yerushalmi that seems to indicate that perhaps a person is allowed to put their life in risk to save somebody else. The Bavli holds you're not allowed to put your life in risk to save someone else. And that's why back in the day most poskim held you were not allowed to donate an organ, because technically you're not allowed to put your life in jeopardy to save somebody else. Nowadays the procedure is more streamlined. It's not such a sakana. Then it is permitted, maybe it's obligated. There's almost no question in halacha that we don't have precedent. I'll give you an example. More recently we spoke about artificial intelligence. Are you allowed to use it on Shabbos? So you say, well, you know, what possible precedent could there be for artificial intelligence? But there's a Tosfos that talks about if your maiso or your dibur causes an immediate result, is that considered your act? Is it not? In other words, there's almost no contemporary issue that you can't find precedent in Shas and Poskim. But when it comes to the ethics of warfare, this in a way is the most unprecedented halachic subject ever to face Kallah Yisrael. And the reason why it's unprecedented is because from the day that Nebuchadnezzar came and he destroyed the first Beis HaMikdash and he hurled Kallah Yisrael into Galus, we've been persecuted. We've been a nation on the run. We have not been in our own land. We've been in Babylon, in Iraq, Iran, Yemen, Morocco, Egypt, America, France, Germany, and basically we had not been in a settled way in Eretz Yisrael for 2,000 years. And now all of a sudden, for the first time in 2,000 years, Kallah Yisrael returned to Eretz Yisrael in an unprecedented way. And I'm not here to speak about the halachic nature of the state of Israel. That's beyond the scope of the next 2 days. I'm not here to discuss what state and what status in halacha the modern state of Israel has. But nevertheless, the reality is that the country of Israel has a war, has an army. And it's faced with shilas and halacha that has never been faced with in our entire history. And while every other subject in halacha we have precedent, we have tshuvos. Anybody know what is the largest corpus of material of Torah Shebal Peh that we have? Is it Gemara? Is it the Rambam? Is it, you know, the biggest corpus of material is Shilas Uchuvas Shailom Eshev. The Chuvas of Rav Yosef Shal Halevi Natanzan is the single biggest corpus of material of the Torah Shebal Peh. And it's interesting because in the Shailom Eshev he writes that every single year he made a siyum on Tanach. So interesting. His custom was to be Messiahim, Torah Nevi'im, Ksuvim. You know, Reb Chaim Kanievsky was Messiahim Shas every year. He was Messiahim, Torah Nevi'im, and Ksuvim every year. And question is, we have no tshuvas in the Noda B'Yehuda of how a Jewish army is supposed to conduct warfare. Do we have any limitations? Do we have to knock on doors and say, Rabbi Sai, we're coming, all innocent civilians live now? Do we have to do that? Are we obligated to do that? Do we have to send out leaflets? We have no tshuvas in the Chassam Sofer, not in the Noda B'Yehuda, not in Rabbi Kiva Eger, not in the Shlomo Kluger. We have no precedent of how to engage in a halachic war. So you'll ask, what's the nafkamina? Are they asking us how to engage in war? That's not relevant. We're not dealing with practically are they asking us. We want to know halachically, what is the responsibility when you're conducting warfare and you have to protect the Jewish people, let's say from either terrorists. Is there a concept of reprisal in Jewish halacha? In other words, let's say they attack us. And now it's not a matter of saving lives because our borders are secured. Are you allowed to take revenge? Is there a concept of revenge in halacha? We have nothing about this. We have no tshuvas about this. The Gemara doesn't discuss this. Even in the times of the Gemara, we were in Galus, we were living in Bavel. There's no army. There's no Babylonian army. So we have nothing in Torah Shabbat Peh. And really, the only precedent we have are the wars that were waged by David and Shlomo. But David HaMelech did not write Shaus Tshuvas She'elas David. We don't have Tshuvas of David. We just know what he did. So the question is, can we use stories in Chumash and Nevi'im and Ksuvim as a precedent for halacha? Are you allowed to learn halacha from Sukkim? If you saw on the sheet, Rav Asher Weiss was asked by a judge in Israel about a husband who killed the wife and then wanted to yarshin her. Yeah? So, why not? Okay, he has to deal with the capital punishment, but why would that affect monetary law? So Rav Asher Weiss brings the story in the Nevi'im where Achav killed somebody, and the Navi rebukes Achav for killing Navos HaYisraeli. He says, Haratzachta v'gam yarashta? You killed and now you want a yarshin? Is that a halacha? Maybe it's not a halacha, but it's a compelling logic. It's a compelling logic. So that's the question. Can we study the narratives of the Chumash, the Nevi'im, and the Ksuvim to learn halachas? And the other question is, do we need to do so? So I want to tell you something very interesting. I see we have a very wide gamut of the spectrum of Klal Yisrael in the room, and I know the various opinions regarding the status of some of the individuals we're going to mention. So I ask you to have the open-mindedness enough that if we cite certain people, take what they say for their content without casting judgment on your personal opinion about them as individuals. I'm going to start with an individual who lived from 1909 to 1995. And if you went to maybe, the Haredi yeshivas, you may not even be familiar with him. Rav Shaul Yisraeli. Rav Shaul Yisraeli wrote the single most influential essay on Jewish military ethics. It sent shockwaves through the Jewish world. He wrote, Judaism does not have moral teachings about how to behave during war. There is no required precedent of how a Jewish army needs to conduct themselves. There's no Gemara that says what a soldier can and can't do. There's no Gemara that says a soldier has to aim at a terrorist, and if there's a human shield in front of him, he has to desist. The Gemaras don't say what to do. And therefore, Rabbi Yisraeli paskind, there is no governing halachic direction regarding Jewish warfare. In a certain way, it makes life very easy. So what does govern Jewish warfare? By the way, just to get a little history about Rav Shaul Yisraeli. So he grew up in Belarus. His father was exiled to Siberia for teaching Torah Barabim. And this Rav Shaul Yisraeli continued to teach Torah in the underground. And he tried many, many times to escape from Europe unsuccessfully. Finally, in 1933, he is caught by Polish border guards. And almost certainly this would have meant immediate execution, if not for the interference of Rav Yitzchak HaKohen Cook, who saved the life of Rav Shaul Yisraeli and brought him to British Mandate Palestine. Rav Shaul Yisraeli was a Talmud of Rav Cook, then a Talmud of Rav Cook's son, and then ultimately the Mamala Makoim of that yeshiva. And he paskind, a Jewish army is not subject to any government or dictates based on halachic direction, because there is no halachic direction when it comes to warfare, because we have no precedent whatsoever. There's no Gemaras, and even if they were, all a Jewish army is subject to is international law. The halacha only subjects the Jewish army to international law. He says, what right does any country have to go to war in the first place? But, by the way, nothing I'm saying is on your sheets. What year was this? 1960s, 1970s. He says, what right do countries have to go to war? Well, how could you go to war? How can you just kill people? Because there's an understanding, a universal understanding, that for countries to be able to exist, sometimes eis shalom ve'eis milchama. This is not a permission given by the Torah. This is a universal rishus, a universal treaty of mankind, that sometimes you're allowed to go to war. And whatever the guidelines of war of this universal treaty is, in other words, if international law is you can't kill civilians, then you can't kill civilians. If international law is you could kill civilians when you're going after terrorists, then you could kill civilians. If international law is you're not allowed to kill children when they're human shields, then you're not allowed to kill children. What binds you by this international law? A bris, a universal bris of mankind. That was his opinion. This was an essay that sent shocks through the Jewish world, and there seems to be a very large segment of Israeli society that subscribes to this ideology. This is the ideology of Rav Shaul Yisraeli.
Why did it send shocks?
What?
Why did it send shocks to the Jewish world?
Because, okay, I'll explain to you. Comes another individual to the scene. Well, to me it's very shocking because we're sort of accustomed to thinking that there is no subject in life in general that we don't have direction from the Torah. I mean, we grow up, if you have to put on your right shoe first, then you put on your left shoe, then you tie your left shoe, but if you're a lefty, you tie your right shoe. I mean, we're not familiar with any single minor practice or minor detail that's not governed by the halacha. And now you're saying that the life and death of a mankind is not, there's no guidelines, there's no direction from the Torah of how to conduct that it's governed by universal treaty. What area in any aspect of life, Choshen Mishpat, Yeridea, Even Oezer, who ever heard of such a concept? We never even heard of this concept in any area of life, let alone such a broad area. Yeah.
Is there an obligation if you're in Hadassah, say like Hamas is being killed?
Yeah.
They killed Jewish people. The other guy, he was identified.
Now I'm just, introducing the subject in general. We'll get into specific questions once the principles are outlined. I'm still introducing the introduction, because every rabbi likes to say a few words before he begins to speak. Okay?
On the bus, you get done.
Okay. Yeah. So this was the opinion of Rav Shaul Yisraeli. Comes to the scene an individual also in the Olam HaYeshivas. I don't think the name is generally mentioned, and I don't think his works are generally studied. A very courageous, brave individual, a great scholar. He was born in Poland at the end of World War I. His parents flee hunger and pogroms. He moved to Palestine as a young boy. He fought with Haganah. He fought with the IDF during the War of Independence. And then he served for 20 years as the chief chaplain of the IDF, and then later the chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Shlomo Goren, who wrote a major work on the ethics of warfare. It's called Meshiv Milchama, many volumes. And he is the one who invented the concept of halachic ethics of war. And that indeed, the same way every aspect of Torah is governed by Shas and Poskim and the background of Chamisha Chumshei Torah, Nevi'im and Ksuvim, there is a halachic imperative of how to fight war. And this was, so to speak, the invention of Reb Shlomo Goren, who was a controversial figure. Reb Ovadia Yosef fought vehemently his candidacy as chief rabbi, and mostly because of a particular incident about the Langer family, the Langer children, who there was a question about their lineage because the mother had been previously married and then she married somebody else, and now there's a question whether the children were mamzerim or not. And Rabbi Goren said that if we don't find some kind of loophole here to allow the children to remain bekahal, then the Israeli government is going to start governing the marriage process in the state of Israel, and that we can't have because then they're going to allow civil marriages. So to uphold the sanctity of Jewish lineage, l'shem shamayim, he was trying to come up with some kind of loophole, which Rabbi Vadia Yosef said was absolutely wrong, and the Agudas Yisrael said it's not halachically sanctioned. But you should know, just as an aside, that Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik agreed with him, and so did Rav Henkin. Rav Henkin agreed with him. Yeah. So that's just the background. He was when when the old city was liberated. You have the famous pictures of him blowing the shofar, and he was the one who single-handedly liberated Hebron. So the IDF. He was supposed to be following the IDF into Hebron the day after they liberated the old city, and the IDF was, so to speak, behind him. And he was the first one into the city of Hebron. He removed their flags. He put up the Israeli flag. He liberated the Maras HaMachpelah. And then a few days later, Moshe Dayan said sorry, and he gave back Hebron to the Arabs. So he also believed in remaining, upholding sovereignty of the Harabayas, and he went there on many occasions. But I'm just giving you background that the concept, the first one really to bring up that a Jewish army is subject to halachic guidelines and basis from Shas and Poskim was Rabbi Goren. So the question is, okay, what halachic basis is there for warfare? Just if we look at the first sheet of Mar Mekayimos in the Minchas Ashar and Parshas Matos, he brings up the question of whether you could learn halachos straight from Nevi'im and Ksuvim. By the way, there's a general subject. Can you learn halacha from Agadata? Can you learn halacha from Agadata Gemara? So that, on page 28, the Minchas Ashar brings, that's a machlokes achronim, that could you learn halacha from Agadata? The Shvus Yaakov says you could learn halacha from Agadata as long as you don't have any contradiction from Shas. In other words, there's a klal, ein lemeidim min ha'agada. We don't learn from Agadata. So the Shvus Yaakov says, hey, you don't learn from Agadata. That's when you have a Gemara Mefureshes against the Agadata. But if you have a straight up Agadata and it seems to indicate certain practice, you are allowed to learn from it. The Noda B'Yehuda says no, not at all. Noda B'Yehuda says you could have a straight up Agadata Gemara without any stira from Shas and Poskim, and you don't follow it. Agadata Gemara is not compelling evidence to how to conduct yourself in any issue. Which is, it's hard to understand. There's so many different examples of Agadatas that we learn from. There's a famous Gemara in Psachim that the Tzfardeya, I'm bringing up the Tzfardeya because today we might see a few Tzfardeya in the Everglades. According to the Ramban, Tzfardeya are alligators. But the Tzfardeya jumped into the fire, and that's the source for the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. Right? Where the Gemara asks in Psachim, why did Hanani, Mishael, Azariah jump into the fire? They made a kavachomer from the Tzfardeya. The Tzfardeya, who were commanded they could go into the kneading bowls and they could go into the tables, they went into the fires. So we're Mitzvah and Kiddush Hashem, certainly we should. I mean, you're learning from Tzfardeya, it's an Agadata Gemara. But that is cited as the source for Kiddush Hashem. But the opinion of the Noda B'Yehuda is you cannot learn anything from Divrei Agada. However, stories in Tanach may be different. Stories in the Chumash, according to the way the Mefarshim explain it, maybe they're not halachic rulings, but certainly they would give us some direction in terms of how we conduct ourselves. So a few examples in Bavli will not look at a story in Chumash and say, oh, they did this and this and this, okay, we paskin this way. But in the Yerushalmi, there are a number of examples where, for example, in Gemara Moed Katan, how do we know Avelos is 7 days? So it says, Vayas la'aviv avel shivas yamim. So Yerushalmi asks, but you can't learn out Koydem Matan Torah. So Gemara brings a different pasuk, that upon the death of Nadav Avihu, uPesach oyamoye teishvu yoimam v'layla shivas yamim. So it seems that the source of Avelos, the Yerushalmi learns from pasuk in Chumash. How can you learn from pasuk in Chumash? That's what they did. They happened to do that. Maybe it's not halachically binding, but you see, there is an idea that if this is the way the religion was practiced in the times of the Chumash, you could learn out from their halach l'maisa. Or there's an idea of ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. Where do we learn that from? Ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. We learn out from the Lavan, from your Zayda. Your grandfather Lavan said to Yaakov Avinu, Malei shavu azais. How do you learn out halacha from what Lavan did? But apparently, you could learn out from Matan Torah. So the question is, okay, very good. Let's assume Lamedim midivrei masiyos shebetorah. What wars were conducted in the Torah that we could learn out? In other words, let's say after October 7th. So you have a few thousand terrorists in Gaza. And let's theoretically assume they're also innocent civilians, okay? Just for the sake of theory. Okay, I'll tell you off camera something about that. But let's assume that the civilians are innocent. And they're using civilians as human shields. Are you allowed to kill innocent people in order to take revenge against murderers? In order to kill murderers to prevent them from potentially killing Jews one day? In other words, how careful does one have to be not to kill an innocent civilian? Do we have any precedent in the Torah of how to deal with these so-called innocent civilians? So off the bat, we know that when Yaakov Avinu was facing Esav, if you look on page 4, so it says Yaakov Avinu was very afraid. Vayira Yaakov ma'od vayetzo. Yaakov was afraid, he was distressed. Rashi says, Vayira, he was afraid lest he be killed. Vayetzo lo, he was distressed, im yaharoig hu es acherim, lest he kill others. Now Rashi doesn't say he was afraid he would kill Esav. And I know, right, if you listen to the Shiurim, we know the acherim maybe is a pidrush. But simply, why does Rashi say he was afraid lest he would kill others? Why doesn't Rashi say he was afraid lest he would kill Esav? It seems that he's not afraid lest he'll kill Esav. Esav was coming to kill him. Haba lahargacha, hashgeim v'hargai. Esav was a roidev. But maybe Yaakov Avinu was afraid then the course of killing Esav, maybe he would kill innocent civilians, which, by the way, the Maral says that even though they were also coming to kill Yaakov Avinu, so they weren't really innocent, but the Maral says, but maybe a few of them were just getting caught up in the social pressure, and they really weren't coming to kill, and Yaakov could never really know for sure, so Yaakov was afraid that he might end up killing a quote-unquote innocent civilians, and that distressed him. So can we learn from there that you have to be careful not to kill an innocent civilian? Or do you say, no, just the opposite? Yaakov Avinu went to war, and he was going to do it. Maybe all we should learn from there is, you're allowed to kill innocent civilians, but you shouldn't rejoice about it. You should feel distressed about it. You should feel tsar that you have to take the life of another human being. So it's very hard to learn out, halachically, are you allowed to, are you not allowed to? All we know is one thing, Yaakov Avinu was going to do it. So if anything, this indicates that you could go to war. Did Yaakov Avinu send a letter to Esav and say, Esav, you're coming to kill me, but I'm dropping a leaflet to your 400 guys that if any of them are on the fringe, they should run away now. Yaakov Avinu didn't do that. So where does it come from? Is an army required to drop a leaflet and say, we're going to carpet bomb this area in 24 hours. If you want to save your life, run now. Otherwise, forever hold your peace. So it's very interesting. If you look in Shmuel, again, this is all by way of introduction. If you look in the Navi Shmuel, so Shaul is commanded to wipe out Amalek. So the first thing he does is he has to count his troops. You're now to count Jews, so he he says, everybody give a sheep, and we're going to count the sheep. Take a look on page 5. Vayavoy Shaul ad Yer Amalek. So Shaul comes to Amalek. Vayorev banochal, and he strives in the valley. Vayomer Shaul el Hakeni. Shaul says to the Keni. Who knows? Who's the Keni? Keni is the family of Yisrael. And Shaul says word, listen. L'chu suru redu mitoich Amaleki. Flee, depart from the Amaleki. Meaning, get out of here. Run. We're going to wipe you out. Penoi sifcha imai. We're going to kill you with them. So this is basically the precursor. This is like the precedent that if you're going to fight a war, and there might be innocent civilians there, you drop leaflets and you say, all innocent people, run away. Can you learn from there that you're obligated to do that? Probably not. Look at the pasuk continues. V'ata asisa chesed im kol bnei Yisrael. You, Yisrael's family, we owe you a debt of hakaras hatoiv. You did chesed to us. Ba'aloi sami mitzrayim, when we came out of Egypt. Vayasar keni mitech Amalek. So the Keni fled. So you're going to use this as a precedent that you're required to knock on doors and tell innocents to escape? The pasuk says why Shaul did that. Shaul said, we owe you a debt of gratitude. Yisroi saved our lives. Yisroi housed Moshe Rabbeinu's wife and children. We don't owe a debt of gratitude to the quote-unquote innocent civilians of Gaza. We owe them anything. They did a chesed with us. Many want to use this as a precedent that you're obligated to warn the innocent civilians. Is it a precedent? The Navi says there's a special circumstance in this case. We owed them something. We had gratitude. Their family, their cousins. We owed them something. So again, this is an example of where innocent civilians were warned, but it's very hard to say that this obligates us to follow suit. Okay? That's part 1. And Mayor Glatstein, that's your cue to press the button. Thank you.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.